JV and I are not only best friends, but we're colleagues in the field. And as was mentioned, over the last decade, we've been working on trying our best to create sustainable communities and accelerate clean energy wherever we are. Back in 2009 and 2010, I had an opportunity. I was selected for a 2-year work study at the U.S. Department of Energy in their Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewables. And in fact, in the room today is our mentor, Mr. Scott Minos. If you could please stand up. Scott reached out to me. I remember I was at UCF. I was literally doing an ideas event, raccoon recycling, believe it or not, doing recycling, this whole event. I get a call from Scott. He's like, "You've been selected. You're going up to DOE." I was like, "This is unbelievable." And actually, that's when I got to be introduced to, again, one of my best friends, Justin Vandenbroek, who also, year after I left, ended up getting the same position up at DOE, right?
Show me all the spots in DC I needed to go to.
Right? So we had, a foundation of looking at things at a national level, thanks to Scott and the mentorship that he gave us. And since then, we've really started to get engaged. So a year after I got back, I ended up helping to mobilize the Ideas chapter at UCF to write a grant. We won $750,000 from Progress Energy and got to do the full development, the full consultation, and then actually put on hard hats and installed 107 kilowatts at the UCF main campus. Who here has seen this array with the raise of a hand here? If you go to UCF main campus, it's the largest solar array on campus currently. It will be trumped by about more than 40-fold, I think. 100-fold here pretty soon. Making me look bad, JV. In addition, it wasn't just about solar. Clean energy is about also driving energy efficiency within our homes and our buildings, right? It's about energy storage. It's about electric vehicles. It's really a whole slew of a future that's using clean and renewable resources to power and to store our lives. And so we also launched, through Ideas, something called Kill-A-Watt, off of the term kilowatt, right? And it's an energy competition within dorms where students were competing to save energy, and they were giving little incentives. You'd be surprised how far $250 scholarships would go. We ended up collectively saving $50,000 in 2 months at UCF and getting recognized by the U.S. Department of Energy. We also launched what's called the Energy Specialist Training Program, training students to use the Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool, benchmark the entire campus, and figure out which buildings are energy hogs and which ones aren't. And moving that forward, a couple years back, the Ideas chapter at FIU down in Miami also found a grant, wrote a grant, and I worked with them to develop a 20 kilowatt system and fully LED retrofit a homeless shelter in Miami called Camilla's House. And this was really the foundation behind some of our clean energy programs in Ideas, which evolved into taking this knowledge at the national level and what we were doing here in the country and evolving it to our international chapters, where I'll turn it over to Justin.
Sure, thank you. All right. I appreciate that overview, and big thanks to Scott, actually. He's the one who introduced me to Chris. We were developing a solar project in South Africa as part of the Engineers Without Borders chapter at Florida State University, and it was just primarily students at the university, and he's just like, hold on, I gotta invite this guy, Chris Castro, to this call. I'm like, who is this guy? Scrolling on his LinkedIn, I'm like, wow, oh man, I thought I had my stuff together, I need to get to work. So it's been a healthy competition for some time. But anyways, fast forward to 2015, I was out in San Francisco doing a leadership program at the time, one of the world's largest solar energy companies. And they had this ambition to power over 1 million homes in East Africa and Asia and just developing nations in general through renewable energy. And so I had the opportunity to spearhead this program on behalf of SunEdison and then bring in ideas in our chapters throughout Uganda and Tanzania, in Kenya, to look at how can we use the framework of the Hive and think do tanks to bring it into villages and start thinking through some of the challenges that the communities are facing, but already in their mind have the solutions to. And so we facilitated workshops, taught a lot of our student leaders on energy fundamentals, taught them how to read an electricity meter, how to understand their electricity bills, and ended up spending 30 days out in Uganda in rural villages that don't even have electricity. So if you could imagine that, no lights, no projector, no TV, etc. So we collected a lot of data. We ended up working with the United Nations Foundation to then take this data, roll it up, and package it up to UNF and DC so that they can then work with the communities and distribute the funding.
Every site that they went to, which we gathered over 300 individual facilities, schools, medical clinics, and community centers were the focus. And we went to these locations, took a picture of their rooftop, identified whether or not they had access to grid connection, whether or not they had reliability of any type of back-end power, and all that went into a serious database of our, essentially that was sent over to the UN, and we mobilized over 30 of the IDEAS chapters in Uganda to capture all that information as our Ideas for Energy Access initiative. So it was pretty remarkable what we were able to pull off.
At this time, we wanted to give everybody the opportunity to break out back into your groups. And when you think about the context of renewable energy, not just inside our own homes on top of a roof, just the very cookie cutter typical use, I want you all to take the time to think about some prototype or some unique application that solar could play in either our everyday lives or people that you know, or even people that you've been engaged with through Facebook or through the Ideas Network. So how could they use solar energy to maybe power a water pump? Or what key application can renewable energy play in our communities? So take 5 minutes to sit down with your group, think through some of your ideas that you may have, and then we'll quickly report back. Excellent, excellent. So I wanted to give you guys a picture, right? We saw that nationally or internationally, the majority of our electricity is non-renewable energy based, right? But where are we going and what is going to lead to this deployment? I think the first thing to take note of is the amount of investment that's going into it. Energy is a $2 trillion industry with a T. It's a lot of zeros, right? So what is renewable energy grossing? How much investment are we getting? And in 2017, from the latest numbers, or 2016, we had over $81 billion go into solar deployment and development. For wind, we had roughly $67 billion go in. And actually it's 61 for developed nations, or 81 for developed nations and 80 for underdeveloped, which is super fascinating to see that we're seeing the same amount of investment, not only in developed nations, but developing nations for solar. So that's something to say about the electricity of the future. As underdeveloped countries start to build their energy infrastructure, they're choosing not to build central generation and run transmission lines hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles. They're deciding to decentralize these systems and put them in the communities that are actually consuming the energy. So they're going to leapfrog, just like how cell phones leapfrog landlines. If anyone has been to a developing nation, whether it be Nepal, India, somewhere in East Africa, you'll notice you don't see landlines running, and nobody has home phones. Everybody has cell phones. So they leaped over the entire infrastructure that we built here in the US, and a lot of people estimate that's what's going to happen with energy in developing nations as they start to come online. So we're seeing a lot of investment. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of jobs. Globally, we have over 9 million people working in the clean energy economy. Yep, almost 10. We'll definitely hit that by the end of the year. So we're seeing a significant amount of jobs from bioenergy, geothermal, solar, wind. The industries are truly creating a clean energy economy that's revolutionizing the 21st century. And I think it's really, for me, when I think of solar, I've been doing solar since 2009. It's been a long time that I've been in this industry, for at least my lifespan. And I like to think that we started from the bottom, if anyone's heard that track before. Like, we started from the bottom, now we're here. Like, our industry is starting to tip, right? When I reflect on 2009, the amount of deployment, 385 megawatts of solar. If we look at last year, we had 14,762. So if you just think about the last 15 years or so, we've seen over 1,000 times more. As a matter of fact, 4,000 times more solar put on the grid than what we had 15 years ago. And we're continuing with this trajectory. And as a result, the cost is significantly declining. So when you hear people say solar is too expensive, oh, it's not cost effective, they truly don't understand the economics. And I don't want to burden them, right? Because this is a small amount of time, right? 2009, 2016, on the orange axis, or the orange line, you're seeing the decline in costs. So the power is a lot cheaper, 80% decline in the past 5 years. It's pretty remarkable. And I think it's important to ask yourself, how is that changing the energy that's powering our cities, right? How is it changing the energy mix of Orlando, of the state of California, of other communities and states around our country? And if you look at the recent past, I guess, 6 years of energy generation, we've gone from where you didn't even see solar being part of the energy generation mix, right? So what this graph is, right, 2010, in this graph, it says new US electricity generating capacity additions. So what energy source is being put online, right, in 2010? And at that time, 32, so you've got in black, you have solar, in dark blue, you have natural gas, light blue, coal, green, wind, and dark green, other, right? So you can see in 2010, 32% of new electricity generation, of new power plants being built, was coal. Look at 2016. It doesn't even show up. People aren't building coal power plants. And I'll save the politics on that one. But you guys can keep that in mind next time you're at the dinner table with those relatives that you just can't stand. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Not applicable to my life, but it is. So 2010, look at solar. 4% of new electricity generation was solar. Rooftop solar, commercial businesses, large solar farms out in the desert or in the countryside. And now look at it, 2016. We put on more solar than any other source of electricity in the US. More than wind, more than natural gas, more than coal, more solar than any other source. And I think this is really telling about what's happening for the future of the renewable energy and the energy economy. And so what about the jobs, right? I saw a really funny article. I think Morgan sent it to me. Morgan works with me. He does a lot of business development in the solar industry. And he sent an article that someone was saying, well, it takes so many more people to put solar. Kelly's laughing. She saw that. It takes so many more people to put this much solar on the grid, so it's not energy efficient. You're like, wait, what? Like, no, it's democratized, right? Solar energy is very accessible. People like Jeff, they go out, their companies, they put it on people's roofs. They put it on commercial businesses. Unlike a coal generation plant, no one came to your door and said, in door-to-door sales, and said, hey, I'm so-and-so with Coal City. Can I put a coal plant on your roof or in your backyard? That just doesn't happen, right? So you're looking at an industry that is very accessible from a consumer standpoint. And that's one of the beautiful things about it. So we're seeing this immense amount of job growth. Actually, for the past 4 years, it's been 20% job growth year over year. It's outpacing the national average of job growth by a factor of 10, which is remarkable. So we have over 250,000 people in the solar economy here in the US. 250,000 people. And if you just look back to 2010, we had less than 100,000 people. So an immense amount of people are becoming part of the economy. So you can see with this job growth and the accessibility of this industry, it's creating a remarkable amount of jobs, and it's super exciting, and it's something that I wake up for every day, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later about what we're doing to create pathways to join the clean energy economy. So here's some socioeconomic statistics. 28% of the industry is female, which is really interesting. The coal industry is 9% female, no, 13% female. So you're seeing that there's a lot more females active in the industry. And we have a long way to go. 17% is Latino Hispanic, 7% is African American. So we have a long way to go as it relates to inclusivity and diversity in our workplace. And I want you all to keep that in mind as we go through our next breakout exercise. But also, I mean, as you're talking to folks, 9% of our industry is veterans. It's remarkable. I mean, who else is going to go out to the desert and build a solar array? Not your average person, but a lot of veterans who went out to the Middle East, they have that wherewithal and they have that skill set to go out there. And there's actually some amazing organizations facilitating that transfer from the military as a veteran into the industry. It's really exciting. And one last thing, 67% of the solar industry does not have a bachelor's degree. That's something to think on, right? Education is not for everybody. Higher education is certainly not for everyone. So when we look towards an industry that can be accessible for many people, right, 250,000 people, and 67% of them don't have a bachelor's degree, it's a lower barrier to entry. So I'm going to let Chris give an overview on the state of Florida, and then also dive into what's happening here in Orlando, right? We've looked at things from an international standpoint, from a national standpoint. Now we're going to get to the state level and then into the city level.
So we're the sunshine state, but we're not so sunny as it relates to solar. And there's a lot of reasons why. I get a lot of questions from people out of state saying, why aren't you guys harnessing the power of the sun? You guys probably drove down right from Massachusetts. You're expecting to see solar all over the place, amazing solar resource, not a lot happening. Well, it really comes down to how the policy and the incentives play out within our state. And there are a couple of key things that drive solar marketplaces. One of those is called the Renewable Portfolio Standard. And this is essentially where the state Public Service Commission requires that a certain mix that powers a state is coming from renewable energy. Let's say it's 20% by 2020, right? In Florida, unfortunately, we don't have a renewable portfolio standard. So there's no real drive for the utilities to be driven to make that happen. They're just doing it as fast or as slow as they want to do it, right? Also, by not having an RPS, there's something called the Renewable Energy Certificate, or a REC. And RECs are developed as a commodity to be sold and essentially sold to utilities or to businesses who want to get a certain percentage of their mix from renewables as well. And if you don't have an RPS, you don't necessarily have a marketplace for renewable energy certificates, which is actually a major driver for revenue in many of the other states that are driving solar, like Massachusetts. Number one in the country in terms of installed capacity happens to be Mass because of their policy landscape. They're an A. We're a C, right? We also we have low electricity costs. So when you're comparing us to other parts like the Northeast, our electricity costs are quite low. They're 10.5, 11 cents on average per kilowatt hour. Well, I'll say that up there, they're spending 14, 15 cents a kilowatt hour, right? And so when you're trying to do, California's 23. So when you're trying to do the cost benefit analysis of putting solar versus buying grid power, the higher the grid power is, the better the return is for solar, the more appealing it looks, right? So the lower the cost is, the longer the return on investment, which makes it a little bit more difficult to go solar here in the Southeast. There is something that is going for us, and that is something called net metering. And net metering is essentially where the utilities are required to buy back your electron at a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you produce 1 kilowatt hour and put it onto the grid, the utility has to credit you 1 full kilowatt hour that you can take off the grid. And the grid becomes essentially our battery backup, right? Think of the grid as a battery backup, because that's essentially what it is. Well, in Florida, they're required to buy back 100% of that credit until you produce over what you consume, right? And the second you produce over, let's say you consume 100 and you produce 110, that additional 10 is bought back at avoided cost, which is why we're actually a B. Some other states will say, well, we're going to keep incentivizing you, and we'll allow you to value that electron at a 1-to-1 even beyond your consumption, right? So that's a little bit of the back end of how policy really drives investments into solar, right? So who remembers the last 2 years of battles in the state of Florida for policy, right? This room was a big reason why we were able to do the right thing when it came down to voting, right? The people in this room. There's no doubt about it. So we had this one group, Floridians for Solar Choice, which Ideas for Us was a founding member of. We had Sierra Club, we had many other groups, SACE and others, and we developed a group of citizens and organizations who were trying to push forward third-party power purchase agreements, essentially the ability for us to buy and sell electricity from a solar company, which in the state of Florida is illegal, right? And these guys, Consumers for Smart Solar, which I kind of scratched out and said, utilities against solar, don't be fooled, vote no on one. Basically, these guys were a bunch of utilities who came together to try to stall us in the progress, right, of solar and really maintain the current policy landscape in the Constitution, which would have been a nightmare. Because in order to reverse that, we have to pass another amendment to take that one out, and then we have to pass another amendment to do the right thing, right? Whereas right now, we're at square one again. This is what happened. We had a huge coalition of $30 million that entered a group called Consumers for Smart Solar from Duke, from FPL, from TECO, from Gulf Power, of course the Koch brothers and ExxonMobil really funding this stuff. $30 million were tracked to convince voters to vote yes on Amendment 1. And they needed 60% of the vote. And we ended up getting over 50% of people to vote no on 1 because Amendment 1 blocks the sun. We only raised $3 million versus 30, 10% of the money. And through social media and through community groups like this, we were able to educate the public enough to actually pass And where did we win? We passed Amendment 4 and we passed Amendment 1. Both of these things. I didn't really touch on Amendment 4. We did a really good thing last year when we voted on Amendment 4 to vote yes on this. This essentially is a tax exemption on solar leased equipment and on commercial and utility scale solar, right? The way that the economics work on solar is usually you have a developer and an investor who owns these large arrays, and usually that investor was getting taxed a certain amount of money. It was called tangible personal property tax. Well, that money essentially is what the investor wants, and it was going to the government. And what we did on Amendment 4 is we exempted that tax by 80%, right? Now you have to pay only 20% of the tax, which allows the economics to really roll a lot better. Right now, solar leasing is a consideration in this market, which is huge. And then, of course, Amendment 1 blocking that was huge because now we're back at square one, and we can mobilize to really pass, hopefully, a deregulated market. So that gives you a landscape on Florida, where we're at, and the last 2 years of policy. And now I want to talk to you about our programs in the city of Orlando, because we truly are fortunate to be living in a city with elected officials and a mayor who truly prioritize and who understand the benefit of moving towards a clean energy future, right? Greenworks Orlando is now celebrating our 10-year anniversary. I want to recognize Brittany Sellers in the back. She's our sustainability project manager. Brittany works in my office along with Ian Jurgensen and Joe England and a couple of others, and essentially this plan has been guiding Orlando to be a leading city that really focuses on being more environmentally friendly, more socially inclusive, and more economically vibrant. And we do that by focusing on several key verticals: local food systems, transportation, energy and buildings, water, waste, livability, and the green economy. And so a couple things for you all to know. First and foremost, we've had a goal to power the city operations 100% from renewables by the year 2030. So we have a goal up and running right now that's saying all of the city buildings, all of our city operations, the Amway Arena, our wastewater treatment plants, we want to power them 100% by renewables. And how have we been doing that? Well, we've been using our rooftops, some of our rooftops now, to expand solar, and we've been working with OUC on expanding utility scale solar arrays. So here's actually, for most people who don't know, here's a new solar farm that's being commissioned as we speak right now that people will have access to at your homes and the like. And look how big this thing is. It is over 25 acres. It's right next to the Stanton coal plant. It is on a coal ash landfill, of all places. It is literally the most ironic solar array you can have. But this thing is acres upon acres upon acres of solar. And the cool thing about this is it's called community solar. So think about a community garden, right, where people can have an individual plot in a community garden. Well, you as a homeowner can have an individual couple of panels here. I need 5 panels. I need 10 panels. Your business might need 100 panels, and everybody can virtually net meter what's being produced here to offset your consumption at your house. Now people who have trees over their roof who can't have solar can get solar from this farm. Now people who live in apartments and condos, which is 48% of the population in Orlando, they can tap into the solar farm. So now being able to expand community solar through OUC has been remarkable. And we had a small 400 kilowatt that in 3 days was literally booked. Now we have 12 megawatts coming online here within the next couple of months. So this is being commissioned. That's live. That just came out last week. One of the most important things that has just happened in the last month, for those who are on social media and pay attention, is that instead of just thinking about us as a municipal operation, we brought forward a proposition for Mayor Dyer to join mayors across the country and commit to going 100% citywide by mid-century, by 2050. And he did just that. This is him and our group. Brittany's right behind me. Who were...
Better sign that thing or else...
We bring this thing forward. He's like, Chris, what are you making me sign here? I'm like, trust me. And he had me do my due diligence. I contacted OUC commissioners. I contacted key staff. I spoke to our commissioners, and I basically showed them the economics of what this opportunity could be for Orlando. And we became the largest city in Florida, still are, to commit to going 100% renewables. This could not have happened without the public pressure of the community wanting this. This was a video that was online, got more traction than any video that the city of Orlando has seen in years. 18,000 views on Facebook, over 30,000 hits on LinkedIn. I mean, Mayor was shocked. He was like, this is unbelievable that the people really want us to move towards being more sustainable and cleaner future. And I told him, I was like, dude, I told you. Like, this is, I was like, dude, I told you, man. So now the beautiful thing is that in addition to him just signing the 100% commitment, he also signed the Under 2 MOU just days before Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Under 2 MOU is the subnational climate agreement that came out of Paris for cities and states to sign in order to commit to that 80% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 1990 levels by mid-century. Right? So we have actually committed to go above and beyond that, which is a huge deal. Here's a picture of one of the arrays. It's a 420 kilowatt system. You can't really see the full amount here. This was done actually in partnership with ESA Renewables, and it's a ballasted system. We're trying to use these rooftops. In fact, I've identified over 2 megawatts of city rooftops that we can expand solar on, and as well as brownfield sites like contaminated lands that we own and manage, as well as wastewater treatment plants that are just huge, open, vast, open land, right? And so we're already exploring this as a city. The other cool thing is financing happens to be one of the biggest barriers to getting people to go solar. And there are some really cool tools that we passed. One of them is called the PACE program, Property Assessed Clean Energy. And PACE allows a homeowner or a business to get 100% of the money to go solar, and then repay that money over long terms on the property taxes. So instead of you actually paying every single month a loan, you're paying one time per year on your property taxes, and you're able to stretch out the payment as far as 20 years. So if the return on investment is just 10 and you stretch it out for 20, you're cash flow positive from day one. You're making money, literally, right? And so we've been able to find ways and mechanisms to make it easier for people to get access to money to do the right thing, right? It's called PACE, and you should definitely look it up. There's another cool thing we've been working with OUC on, and that is we're the land of lakes and water bodies. So there's something called photovoltaics that we're actually starting to explore that is really, we have the first 35 kilowatt grid-tied system, and here's a short 14 seconds of how this thing looks when being installed. So we partnered with UCF, and we're doing some studies on the aquatic life of the lake to ensure that we're not, basically harming any aquatic plant or animal species within that. But essentially, that's the first test, a 35 kilowatt grid-tied floating solar array. And if you think about the retention ponds around the city, you think about the lakes around our cities, huge opportunities. You're talking megawatts upon megawatts upon megawatts of power that we could tap into by harnessing floating solar. So a couple of other things before we dive into our breakout. We also need to find ways to make solar more affordable. Sure, we have funding for it, but how do we draw down the cost of solar? And actually, a good 40 to 50% of the price of going solar happens to be what they call the soft cost of solar. It's not really the hardware of your solar panel or your inverter or your wiring or your balance of systems. It's actually customer acquisition and permitting and commissioning and inspection, all of those soft cost side of things that actually are intangible, right? And so what has started to happen is there's a group called Florida Sun that started here in Orlando and is now expanding across the state, and they're creating what's called solar cooperatives or solar co-ops. And the idea is if we can bulk purchase, if 100 of us want to go solar instead of just one of you, instead of just Banks wanting to go solar in his house, then the cost per watt will drop by 20 to 30%. Why? Because we reach in economies of scale. It's cheaper for the solar company to get 100 kilowatts than it is for them to get 1 kilowatt of power, right? And so it's like going to Costco versus going to your regular convenience store, as an example, right? Being able to find ways to lowering the solar costs. And the cool thing is OUC is starting to pioneer a new model to where if you're an OUC customer, you can use what's called the solar aggregation program, and in groups of 500 kilowatts, they're basically helping to buy down the solar to $2 per watt installed. A regular system today, what are you selling your systems at?
We do
$215. That's amazing. What about you? $262. All right. What about you? Not bulk purchase, just regular. $220, $215. Anyone else? Jeff? 220, 215. So you're saving 20 cents or so if you go through this aggregation program, right? And that's just one example of ways that people can buy down the cost to go solar. Then you can find PACE and tap into that money, and you can offset the cost, right? Without needing to spend any out-of-pocket expense. So that's the important thing. I want you all to start thinking about, how can we get creative about lowering the cost and finding money for these programs, in addition to who's going to install all this clean energy. And that really brings us to our breakout today. We need to empower and develop the workforce of the future. And so I want to turn it back over to Justin to talk about an idea we've been coming up with called Better Future.
So I wanted to dive into what we call the Better Future Solar Job Training Program, right? We posed the question, who's going to build Orlando's clean energy future? We need, as a community, to have pathways towards clean energy jobs. Beyond just academia, beyond a major, which I don't know, I went to Florida State University and there was not a single class I could take on solar. I kind of had to learn the hard way and crawl in attics, shock myself a bunch of times, put solar on roofs. My mom was like, she got gray hairs because of me working in the industry. Right, someone needs to teach our youth, our veterans, folks who are looking to get into the workforce, how can they take part in this clean energy economy? If we hear all these amazing statistics about job growth, about the high levels of deployment, about the cost declines, we need to ensure that we have ways to bring everybody into this clean energy economy. I mean everybody. Make sure that it is accessible and it is inclusive for all. And so that's one thing that we've been spending a lot of time thinking about. What were those meaningful impacts that we had early in our career that led us to a position where we could go to an employer and say, yes, I have this tangible experience. Actually, you know what? I had the opportunity to do a system design, to do an energy consultation with a homeowner. I had the opportunity to actually go on a roof, pick up a solar panel, put it on, plug it into the one next to it, and connect it to the roof. Yes, I've seen how you can actually monitor these systems on your smartphone once you set it up. And so we want to ensure that people have this opportunity. And so what Ideas in ESA, our firm, has been doing and are starting to pull in other people of the solar economy here in Central Florida is develop this program that's going to take people through an overview of the industry so they're very well educated, similar to kind of how you all have gotten this experience to hear about these nuggets of statistics that you can then use to go in and understand how do you look at an electricity bill, right? Some people are like, pay, month goes by, pay. No idea, don't understand it. So how do you actually dissect that and know, wait, maybe I shouldn't put twice as much solar on the roof as needed. I should probably size it appropriately. How do you dissect that? How do you disaggregate it? How do you understand how much electricity a homeowner is using? And then understand what are the fundamentals of the design process. How do you understand when you have 1,000 square foot of roof space, how many panels can you fit on it, and how would I actually engineer that system to ensure it's safe and reliable? Third or fourth, what are the economics, right? If we know it costs $2.15 a watt or $2.20 a watt, whatever it costs, how does that play out? $2 a watt, I don't know what that means, right? Like, you got to understand, how do you put that into a payback period or return on investment? So we want to educate the community on the economics of a solar project. I don't have $20,000 or $15,000 offhand that I'm like, all right, let's go solar. Like, not everybody has that, so you need to find ways to structure that finance for the customer. And really understanding how that works is super important. As a matter of fact, only 4 years ago, 90% of the residential solar industry, residential being homeowners, 90% was third-party owned, meaning people did not own those systems. They got those systems financed through somebody else. We're starting to see, as the costs decline, more people are starting to elect for ownership through a solar loan product. But it's been very common in the past to see where, you know, the average person or even the average small business doesn't have the money to go out of pocket. So what are the financing options? What are the permitting options? How do you interact with your city government or your local county or your utility? I want to give folks that experience. And then how is it built? How do you put the system on the roof? How do you get the system plugged in and commissioned? And then lastly, at the end of this program, we want to have an opportunity to bring all the folks from the solar economy together for a jobs training, so that people, or a jobs fair, so people can then lead to employment, getting their interviews taken care of, going out there and pitching their experience that they had. But all this is very conceptual right now. We've just kind of been brainstorming it over the past, I would say, 4 to 6 weeks of we have this wealth of opportunity, this human capital in our organizations and these projects going on. So how can we all work together as an industry? And that's why we really wanted to work with these folks here in the room based on this basis that you all have gained. What would be an important aspect of creating a job training program? Who would be the right partners? How do we ensure it's inclusive? Who are the funding agencies that may want to fund a project like this? What else is important to cover in the contents of this subject, right? And so the question I posed to you guys in your breakout sessions, we're going to take about 10 to 15 minutes for you all to come together in a group, put together your whiteboards, and ask yourself, how might we create an inclusive and transformative solar workforce development program here in Orlando? Who should those partners be, and how should we do it? So I want you guys to take the opportunity to break out in your groups, brainstorm with one another, and we'll report back and have a solutions showcase at the end of that.